Traffic over there first?
In downtown there was traffic. No, after that it was clear.
Clean road and...
It was just getting out of DC was a bit of a mess. There was construction.
Oh, really?
Whoops. You bet.
Basically, you can almost come like Bhagavad and I just and as I said, like you can say this, or you can just say
Does this amplify or it's just for the recording?
Yeah, there is an...
Oh, okay. So good evening, Hare Krishna. Everyone finished their japa? Okay. So I was, what's that? Sounds like it's on.
Oh, there you go.
Yep. So I was asked to speak on the second chapter, is that right? Which book? Let's choose the Bhagavad Gita. So it's an overview, right? So we're supposed to cover the whole chapter. Okay. So we're going till midnight? Yeah. It's a big chapter, 72 verses. Om Adhyana Timidandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So I guess what we'll do is we'll discuss this section by section, right? Because we're obviously not going to go over all 72 verses in detail. And then if we have any time, we can go back and talk about specific verses. Does that sound all right? Yeah, TK? Okay. So the beginning of chapter 2 is really, in some ways, a continuation of the last verses in chapter 1, right? Because we're hearing more about Arjuna's doubts. Can somebody remind us of what some of the doubts you heard in the first chapter?
To let you know, Kunal is kind of he knows a little bit about Bhagavad Gita, but Kurt is kind of new to this.
Okay.
He's come for the first time to our house.
Welcome.
So I just wanted to let you know.
All right. So you probably won't know how to answer that question. No worries. Are you from around here?
Ohio, Cincinnati.
Oh, Cincinnati.
So he lives here, but he's from there.
Oh, okay. You're from Ohio originally. Okay. I went to college. Well, I went to school in Michigan.
Okay.
Not too far away. Yeah. Are you a Buckeye fan?
Yeah. So
Okay. Anyway, we're not going to allow you. No.
I'll get
I went to University of Michigan. That's all right. My father went to Ohio State. Okay. So, yes.
Yeah, one of the Arjun was worried about like degradation of society because of
Yes. Degradation of society. Right. Yes. Gosh, I think I have so much jet lag. I just got back from India. But for the 41st, no, not the 41st, but there's a verse in the first chapter that really epitomizes that. That was 40, is it? Yes, Adharma Vibhava Krishna Padishyanti Kulastriya Strishu Dushtashri Varshnaya Jayate Varna Sankara. That there would be Varna Sankara. Yes, that there would be unwanted population, and kids wouldn't be brought up properly, and then that leads generation after generation to what we have today, basically. Okay, that's one. Any others? There's actually 5 reasons altogether. Only one of them comes in the second chapter.
So Arjuna was worried, one out of compassion.
Yes, compassion is another one.
Compassionate towards.
That's right.
And second reason, another reason was like he was concerned that when all the family, all the relatives, everybody would die, then
Who's he going to show off to?
yeah.
I mean, come on, let's
What's the
face
fun
it.
of having all that when nobody is there?
Exactly. You know, who are you going to show off your new Lexus to if nobody's around to see it? Right? Or your new house in, North Potomac or whatever it is, right? Isn't it? Yeah. So yes, he was, how am I going to enjoy if all the people I wanted to enjoy with and enjoy this kingdom are all kaputski, they're all finished. Okay, so there's one more doubt in this chapter. Fear of sense reactions was another one from the first chapter, that's right. Right. And so this one is kind of a subtle one, but he didn't know which is better. And he says that, right? I don't know which verse is that? That's, how can I counteract? Then number 5, it would be better to live in this world by begging. And then he says, nor do we know which is better. Text 6. Right? So he's confused. And it's interesting because Krishna does have a famous verse, the second verse, where he kind of gives Arjuna his first little slap in the face. Kutas tvam kashmalamidam, right? He says, well, how have these impurities come about you? You're supposed to be an Aryan. Now, Aryan, the word Aryan has taken on a bad connotation because Mr. Hitler coined it, but he's getting it from somewhere else. And originally it had a very good connotation, right? That person who followed the Vedas and was a good person. So he says that it doesn't. Krishna's anarya justam ashvaryam akirtim pravidam. It's not going to lead to anything good. Right? And so then finally Arjuna kind of gets frustrated. Okay, I got all these doubts. I don't know what to do. And he says in verse 7, Karpanya doso pakatanos svabhava vichtami tadharmas mudijeta. And I won't try to memorize the rest of it. Yashreya samishitami sishasteham sadinam tvam prapanam. That's the key one. The last verse says sishya. Sishya means disciple. So now I'm a disciple. Sishasteham, of you. Sadhuvam tvam prapanam, and I surrender to you. Please instruct me. Okay, and that kind of ends that first section with Arjuna saying that last doubt, and finally saying, I can't figure this out on my own. And Prabhupada mentions there that that's a very important verse, right? Because we all have frustrations. We all have frustrations in life, right? And so he's saying, what do? You go to a person who has knowledge. And you learn from them. And so that's what verse 7 is basically. Now I'm confused about my duty. I've lost all composure because of miserly weakness. In this condition, I'm asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I am your disciple. Please instruct me. So that's the first section. Now the section 11 to 30 is a pretty big section, 19 verses, right? This is the most basic information. It can sometimes is called gyan. Gyan means what? Knowledge, right? And this is gyan in the sense of Gyanis study this knowledge also, right? Because it's just the basic difference between the body and the soul, right? Basic information. And Krishna presents it in a very wonderful way because he takes it from this angle, from that angle, this angle, that angle, right, in these verses. But he begins his discourse just like when you go to school, right? You begin by studying A, B, C, D, right? So he begins with the word asociam, which is A, right? And so he's beginning with the book, and he's chastising Arjuna. Of course, they have that kind of loving relationship where, if you know somebody loves you, right? Then when they correct you, you don't get upset because it's coming from an affectionate, And Srila Prabhupada said that. He said, I don't chastise my my neophyte disciples. I chastise my advanced disciples because then they take it in the right way. Whereas a neophyte disciple may, who are you, my dear Guru, to chastise me? We may still have that kind of, false ego kind of thing going on. But Krishna says, so he says, while speaking learned words. So you're speaking all the, because a lot of the arguments Arjuna gave were not bad arguments. I don't know if Bihari Prabhu mentioned that last week. It's because that whole thing about the degradation of society, that kind of happened. Because so many of the Kshatriyas, so many of the administrators, people who maintained law and order, were finished in this battle. So, Arjuna was saying good things, right? But he was speaking on this level, the Dharma level, but Krishna wanted to bring it to this level, the spiritual level, that we're the soul, not this body. So he says, while speaking learned words, you are lamenting that which is not worthy of lamentation. Is that how it's translated? Not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. Right? And then he says a very important verse, verse 12, because some people misunderstand in Bhagavad Gita that when you attain mukti or liberation, you merge into God, right? The impersonal idea. So verse 12 defeats that, because he says, never was there a time when I did not exist as Krishna. I'm Krishna now. I was Krishna before, now I'm Krishna in the future. And Arjuna, you were Arjuna back then, you're Arjuna now, and you'll be Arjuna in the future. Individuals. And all these other kings, they're also individuals. And they maintain their individuality. So this is a very important verse if you meet someone who has this kind of Mayavad understanding, this idea that we merge into God. It's such a simple verse to show how that's not the case. Okay? So each one of these verses is so important. And then of course the next verse, 13, is such a famous verse, probably one of the most famous verses. So this is that whole changing bodies exhibit, right? You've seen that? Where there's a picture of us as a baby, as a 1-year-old, 5-year-old, 10-year-old, 20, 35, 50, 60, 80, finished, right? And even though the body is constantly changing, our mind is also changing, right? A 5-year-old can't do calculus. Well, most 5-year-olds can, right? But 15 or 20-year-old can, right? So the mind is always changing. But what remains the same? That's who we actually are. That's such a simple presentation, but such a profound presentation. Right? I'm sorry, Prabhu, what's your name?
Bhuvan.
Bhuvan. Yeah, Bhuvan. Yeah, like Bhu, like the earth. Yeah. So Bhuvan showed me a picture of him when he was 5 years old, right? And he said, oh, here's a picture of me, Braj, when I was 5 years old. I said, that's not you. Look how different you are. Right? Your whole body has changed. Your whole, right? And he said, no, that's definitely me. We could have this whole argument. So then my question would be, what has remained the same where you could say that was him? And that's what Krishna is saying, that's who we are, the soul. And then the next verse, also famous verse, Matcha Sparshas Tukantaya, Sitosna Sukadukada, Agama Paidno Tams Titik Shashva. It's such a nice concept. You just gotta, if you're gonna live in this world, you can either bang your head against this world, or you can just learn to be a little tolerant. Right? Krishna's saying here that in the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, right? Happiness comes, distress comes, heat comes, cold comes. Like my son was born in India, right? And then he went to University of Texas, very warm climate. So he just cannot stand the DC winters. He said, how do people live in this, why would anyone choose to live in Washington, D.C.? I went to school in Michigan, it's a lot colder than D.C., But, he's just, he has trouble with this verse. Because, it says that it's like the appearance and disappearance of the winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception because they're not really us. Right? The ups and downs of life, they affect the body, they affect the mind. They don't ultimately touch the soul, which is transcendental. And therefore, Krishna says, Tam Sthiti Shashva, just tolerate it. Learn to tolerate it. So we could go through all of these verses. There's so many famous ones. Verse 16 gives a beautiful definition of what is real and what is not. And he's saying that anything that's eternal, that's real. Anything that's temporary, well, it's what is the word that's used here? It's real. How is it? It's real, right? Like this body is real, but it's temporary. That's the point, right? So anything that's temporary, one way to say it's not fully real, and anything that's eternal is the real deal, so to speak, right? This body obviously is real, there it is, but it's another definition because it's temporary. We look at it differently than the soul. So Krishna's giving so many different ways of looking at the soul. Let's see. Text 20 is another famous verse. Jayate Mriyate Bhakadachin. For the soul there is never birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. And remember, this is taking place on a battlefield. So when Krishna says the soul is not slain, when the body is slain, it takes on even a deeper meaning for Arjuna, because they're about to have a war. Okay? And then a beautiful analogy in 22, as a person gives up old garments, right? So we give up this material body and take on another body, based on our karma. Right? And then gives a little more explanation, because it says the soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon. That's important because we're on a battlefield, and there's a lot of weapons, right? Cannot be burned by fire, cannot be moistened by water, cannot be withered by the wind. So in one sense, like when you were a kid and you maybe saw Superman or something like that, you kind of wish, you could be like Superman, right? But without the kryptonite, right? But we are like Superman in that sense, in the sense that we don't die, no matter what happens to us. The soul is eternal. Well, obviously, we can't, put our hand up and stop a train from coming at us like Superman could, but in that sense that we're eternal. And it's not, it's really interesting knowledge that Arjuna, that Krishna is giving Arjuna here, to realize it. It's not so easy because we're so, especially in the kind of lives that we live, right? Where we go to work and we have to pay the bills and fix the flat tire and go to Trader Joe's or whatever, and do all the things that we do in our day-to-day life, right? And if we're at work, we intermingle with people who haven't studied the Bhagavad Gita, so you're not going to say, really reinforce that. It's really interesting. You tell your colleague, we're not this body, and everything's temporary. So it was easier in bygone days when someone was a sage and go off to the Himalayas or go to Vrindavan. Just like I noticed, I was in Vrindavan last week, and we were at a japa retreat, and chanting 64 rounds every day, one day chanting 98 rounds, and it's such a rarefied atmosphere, and Govardhan Hill is right there. We did it right at Govardhan Hill, and so it's so favorable for understanding this, and of course we'll have to speak of the later chapters, right? So this is a bit of an aside, but to really grasp this, we need Krishna's mercy. It's not just an intellectual pursuit. And we have to perform bhakti. But anyway, so the soul's not cut into pieces. He's unbreakable, insoluble, all these things. And then Krishna does this sometimes. He'll even bring in other philosophies, right? So in 26 it says, if however you think the soul is always born and dies forever, then you still have no reason to lament, right? And Prabhupada, if you just think this body's a bag of chemicals, who cries if you spill a bag of chemicals? Right? So, and then he gives the inevitable truth in 27. For one who's born, death is certain. Unless one that maybe we don't recognize as much, and after death, one is sure to take birth again. And they're saying, therefore, Arjuna, you should do your duty. Remember, a lot of this is inciting, it's encouraging. Superficially, it looks like Krishna is just encouraging Arjuna to fight. Okay? Underneath that, what's really happening is Krishna is asking Arjuna to follow his instructions and developing a loving relationship with him. That's ultimately what's happening, right? But superficially, it's not even the fact. And you know, this is an important point here. You should do your duty, because the pratishta, or the basis of the Bhagavad Gita, is at least, you know, one dispassionately doing one's duties. And then, of course, above that is the devotion, which we'll get to later. But, you know, doing our prescribed duties. Okay, so that is basically, in a nutshell. Oh, well, then there's this beautiful verse 29. We call it the amazing verse. Right? Some look on the soul as amazing. Some describe him as amazing. Some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. So this can be interpreted in different ways. Some look on the soul as amazing. The person looking at the soul is an amazing person. Or the fact that a person is looking for the soul, that's pretty amazing. Right? So it can be looked at in different angles, but the idea is that it's not everyone is looking for spirituality in that way and understanding that we're the soul and not the body. And also the soul's an amazing thing. Like look at an elephant, for example. I didn't see any elephants in Vrindavan. I did see a number of nilagais. I call them blue cows. They're not real. They're more like an antelope. Yeah, antelope kind of thing. But they're pretty cool. Yeah, they're kind of bluish gray color. And they're usually on top of Govardhan Hill. And sighting them is a little rare, so it's kind of fun. I took a picture of one home. Said, "Stay there for that." But what's amazing is, an elephant. So the soul, what is it? Sometimes compared to almost like 1/10,000th the tip of a hair. So that is energizing that whole body. Right? And Srila Prabhupada would often say, what's the difference between someone who's dead and someone who's alive? What's the answer?
So,
Soul's there. The soul is there. Yeah. Yes?
Prabhu, is there a one-to-one relationship between a body and a soul?
Yes, and we might have other micro stuff going on in our body, like, you know, maybe worms and things like that in our body, another soul, but yeah, there's one.
But then how would you explain the phenomenon of population growth globally, for example? So if number of souls is constant.
Because you're looking at only humans.
So is it then the theory is that the total number of species across the universe has been constant?
Number of species, yes. That wasn't your question, though. Right? Population of growth, is that your question? So there's a number of species, right? The Bhagavatam says 8,400,000, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then there's that one story, discussion in the Chaitanya Charitamrita about, is it Haridas Thakur and Lord Chaitanya? And, you know, Haridas Thakur says, please deliver this universe. And he said, no one's going to lament if one universe goes back to God. It goes back to the spiritual world. It's no loss. Because, this universe is compared to a mustard seed. Have you ever seen a mustard seed? It's a little round thing about this big, very small. And so you can imagine how many mustard seeds are in a big bag of mustard seeds, right? And so that's compared to the number of universes. So if you drop one mustard seed out of a big bag, so that your question, you have to broaden your scope a little bit. First of all, there's so many different species. How many blades of grass are out there, right? And then think about all the different planets in this one universe. And then think about, and according to the Vedic literature, that this is one universe amongst many, many universes.
That reminds me of the, just going through this, physicist, renowned physicist Michio Kaku, and his theory, his string theory, says that the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, the theory explains that there are actually multiverses. I wonder where they got idea. They got idea from us. And interesting, one Berkeley scientist said that you guys are just taking from Bhagavad Gita and all that, and he was just rephrasing it and calling it, this is what we are discovering. Was just taking it from Hindu textbook. Why didn't you just accept it? It was so amazing to read acquisitions and all that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada also, this is a little bit of an aside, but he would also wasn't that concerned with overpopulation, because in this sense, first of all, he traveled around the world, and he lived in India in the he was born in 1896, right? So India was quite agrarian back then, right? I mean, he grew up in Calcutta, but still, he saw, as he traveled around the world, he saw all this empty land that wasn't being cultivated. And he knew, how many vegetables and grains you can get from just 1 acre, it's amazing. I don't know if you've seen our garden at the temple. Right? It's just a small, pretty small garden. It produces practically. We were getting what's that big? Yeah. Loki, Loki, which is not my favorite, but anyway, Loki, and just. We couldn't even cook enough, and we cooked 6 times a day for Krishna. It's not, so he thought that it was, bad management in the world and bad governments and things like that. But and the other point he made is that if Krishna is pleased, then the earth is pleased, and the earth can produce bounty of things. If taken care of well, properly. So scarcity he connected also with lack of God consciousness. Okay? Anything else before we move on? So the next section is kind of interesting, because now Krishna goes down. He went up to the spiritual level, like with the soul, and now he's basically telling Arjuna, even if you think you're your body and forget about the soul, you should still do your duty. Even, in other words, if you think you're a Kshatriya, instead of thinking you're a spirit soul, then Kshatriya means like a warrior. In the Vedic understanding, it's sometimes misportrayed as a caste system, but we see in any civilization, there's an intellectual class, there's an administrative class and warrior class, there's producers and businessmen, etc., and women, and then there's laborers. And the Vedas don't say one is better than the other. They're all necessary, right? Like I was thinking, in my office is the Department of Interior. It's this huge building, takes up 2 full city blocks in DC. I'm not wearing my tie today, but I'm kind of a white-collar worker, right? But I was just thinking, if we didn't have all those people maintaining that building, our so-called white-collar, we would be lost. The place would smell, and it would be an awful place. The lights wouldn't work. So it's all a cooperative effort. So part of the cooperative effort is Arjuna was a administrator and a warrior, and he had to do his duty. So Krishna's taking it down a notch, from 31 to 38, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So he's saying, if you think you're your body, and if you do want material gain, you should still do your duty. Because remember, Arjuna is thinking, I'm going to not do my duty and enter and be a warrior in this battle, and go off and live the life of a beggar or something like that, right? And so he's saying that, Arjuna was saying, if I win, I lose. Right? Because even if I win this kingdom, all the people I wanted to enjoy with will be dead. And if I lose, I lose because I'm dead. Right? So Krishna is saying, no, if you win, you win, and if you lose, you win. By just doing what you're supposed to do. So he's kind of like, anyone here play chess? He's kind of checkmating. You know, Arjuna thinks he's wiggling out, and Krishna's checkmate, right? Or at least check. We're not at checkmate yet, but at least he's getting him at all different kinds of angles, which is good because the Bhagavad Gita is read by people from all different kinds of backgrounds. They're not all pure devotees like Arjuna. Right? So we can also take this, we all have our different duties. And when we can substitute the word yudva. Yudva means to fight, because that was Arjuna's duty. For us, it might be fire up the computer and fix the software, whatever work we do. Right? So considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know that there's no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles. And so there should be no need for hesitation. So if you think you're a Kshatriya, you should still do this. And then he says, this is what he means by if you lose, you win, right? Happy are the Kshatriyas, happy are the Kshatriyas to whom such fighting opportunities come unsought, opening for them the doors of the heavenly planets. Because if one's doing one's duty and dies that way, they attain a higher birth. Okay. But if you don't do your duty, then you incur sin. So sometimes the word sin, sometimes in the Judeo-Christian idea we have a certain idea of sin, right? But the Vedic understanding of sin, or at least one definition of it, is simply this: neglecting your duty. Bas. That's it, just that. Neglecting your duty is called pop, or sin. Or at least that's one definition of it. Okay? So, what else? And then he's kind of jabbing him, because Kshatriyas are supposed to be to be a good Kshatriya, you have to have a little, what's that called? Ishvara bhav. Right? Ishvara means controller, and bhav means a mood. So you have to, you can't be a little wimpy guy, right? You gotta say, I'm gonna defeat you, right? You gotta, have a little, strut there in your walk. So he's kind of jabbing at him. He said, people, if you just run away, right, people will always speak of your infamy. And for a respectable person, especially a Kshatriya, dishonor is worse than death. Now that's really interesting, because as devotees, we're generally taught that, we don't worry about our reputation. We're, humility, right? That's right. And if people, or in the Bible, if someone, hits you on this trap, you just give them the other cheek to slap, right? And that whole idea of tolerance and forbearance and things like that. But that's why he's not talking to Arjuna on that level right now. That's why some people, when they read this, they say, wait a second, what's Krishna doing here? That's why it's good to know he's speaking on a different level. He said, if you think you're your body, if you think you're a warrior, okay. People are going to call you ill names. No, it's not that Duryodhana, the people that he's fighting against. They're going to say, oh, Arjuna, there he goes, running away from the battle. He's such a saintly person. He's so compassionate. I wish I was like, they're not going to say that. They're just going to laugh. Look at that little coward wimp, you know. There's a story, I can't remember the name. It's from India. And the Kshatriya went out to fight. But he ran away, he left the battlefield without winning the battle. And so he goes back to his kingdom, and the gates are closed. And he calls up and he sees his wife, you know, could you please open the gates? And she said, what happened? So, well, you must have defeated your enemy. No. And they said, I'm not opening the gates because you must be an imposter, because my husband, he would either defeat the enemy or he'd be dead, but he wouldn't come back like this, so I'm not letting you in. Don't do that to your husband when he comes back from India. Did you change those 1,000 rupee notes? No, then you're not coming back.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
This verse, in verse...
I who's speaking? Oh, okay. I could only see the, yeah.
Okay. Is that?
Yeah.
So, in this verse in text 34,
34?
34.
Okay.
People will always speak of your infamy, and for a respectable person, dishonor is worse than death.
Right.
So, doesn't this verse imply that death is actually bad and infamy is worse than that?
Yeah. I mean, death is not like fun.
Okay, but till now Krishna was saying that, you know, we should be equal when it comes to birth or death.
Right.
These are all associations with the material body, nothing to do with the permanent nature of the soul.
Yes.
So isn't this a bit of a diversion from...
But I think he's talking about in this life specifically.
That's a good answer. Yeah. He's talking within the context. But actually, what you're bringing up in your answer is really good. Is the different layers. In many books, but especially in the Bhagavad Gita, a good friend of mine, Druda Karma Prabhu, he once gave a seminar on the different levels of God realization in the Bhagavad Gita. Right? So, because another place in the Gita, Krishna says, Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyati, Dukkha, Dosha, and Darshanam. That a wise person, and this is not a devotee, but a jnani, always remembers the ills of birth, death, disease, and old age. You know, they keep that in the forefront of they have darshan of that, dukkha, dosha, and darshanam. Right? That this is a place of dukkha. And there's many places in the Bhagavatam that talk about, you know, the time of death, and there's a beautiful prayer by King Kulashekar, Krishna tadiya parapankaja pancharantam adhyaiva me vishatamana saraja hansa. It goes on to say that while I'm healthy, let me die now while I'm healthy, because if I'm, if I have this high fever and this and that, I might not be able to remember you, my Lord. So, so death is not, it's simultaneous. So even though Krishna is saying in the earlier verses, that we don't die, right? And that a wise person laments neither for the living nor the dead. The lamentation, oh my, like in other words, that doesn't mean the act of dying is fun. It's just that the person, the idea being that in this context, that if Arjuna sees that Bhishma has passed away, he had an elderly body, now he's going to get another body in his next life. Of course, he gets a spiritual body, but that's a different thing. So, is that all right? There's different angles of looking at things. So yes, we don't lament for the living and the dead in the sense that we understand the soul has moved on. That doesn't mean that we as devotees, when a loved one, or to speak of a devotee, passes away, I'm not supposed to lament. What's for prasadam today? You know what I mean? Because we have emotions. and we have this knowledge. So it's an interesting. It's kind of like you don't get this so much in America, but in India, right? Driving the clutch. How much to put on? How much to put on the gas? How much to put on the clutch? Right? Because most cars are manual. So how much to understand this gyan part, which is not bhakti, and because actually, I'm really glad you asked this question because verses 11 to 30 were gyan, right? The difference between the body and the soul. And it can lead to a mood of detachment, isn't it? Like you say, okay, I tolerate heat and cold, and there's no pleasure in this world, right? Like that. A devotee needs to live their life according to that knowledge, but if they focus on that too much, it can make the heart a little hard. And our hearts have to be soft in order to approach Krishna with bhakti, with devotion. So it's sometimes said that this word adhikar, eligibility, to be a devotee, it's sometimes said that, of course, if someone was really just a wild sense gratifier, right, before makes it a little tough sometimes, becoming a devotee. But also, if someone was too much of a jnani, too much of a renunciate, it also is a little hard, because they had a tendency to have a bit of a hard heart, and our hearts have to be soft. So, is that right? Yeah. But, death is portrayed in the Shastra, and it's not all, it's not so great. And then, of course, when I lived in Vrindavan for 21 years, which is a very holy place in India, so a lot of devotees go there to leave this world, and when they're in a hospice kind of situation or something like that. So I was with many people who have passed away, and it's quite a edifying experience, quite a spiritual experience, to kind of help them remember Krishna as they're leaving this world.
Probably a related question. So you said in one of the verses that what birth you will take in the next life is derived by your karma. So that is applicable even for devotees, like.
Well, it's
because they say, right, bhakti, once you take the devotional path, your karmas or your sins, from that day onwards, bhakti is more important than your karmas, right? It overpowers it.
We're hoping that that's true. No, it is true. Yes, but in both cases, our next life is determined by our activities. The difference is that our activities, when they're spiritual, gain a spiritual benefit. And therefore, Krishna says in the Gita, we'll study this later, that Suchinam Shimatam Gehe Yoga Broshka Vijayate, that in our next life for a person who's practiced spiritual activities, either they'll go back to the spiritual world if they're pure, or they'll take birth, either if they've made a lot of advancement, this is in the 6th chapter of the Gita, they'll take birth in a devotee family. If they made a little less advancement, Suchinam, which means a Brahminical family, right? Or Shimatam, money. The idea being that if you're not worrying about money so much, you can spend more time on spirituality. But, so that's the kind of thing. Srimatam, Suchinam, devotee, spiritual world.
So even to our present life, we could relate to it, right? We have, like, Krishna has given us all opulences so that we could concentrate more on spirituality and proceed in that direction.
You have all opulences? I'll ask you for a donation after class. Relatively speaking, yes. Yeah. I mean, when you think about, what percentage of the world lives on $2 a day? Or something like that. It's an incredible percentage, like a third to a half or something like that, right? 37, yeah, it's a huge amount. Yeah, so when we think about our lives, compared to that, even though we sometimes worry that we've got our Pepco bill and it seems really high this month, you know, something like that. But when we compare it to other people, yeah. Okay, what else in this? And then, so then towards the end, he says this important verse 38, do thou fight for the sake of fighting. In other words, and that could be, do thou go to work for the sake of working, you know, do our duty. You know, I saw this, living in India, especially when I got there in the 80s, and I visited there in the 70s, you see it a little less now because of course that generation is passing away, but I met a lot of elderly people went through the partition, you know, the separation of India from Pakistan and Bangladesh, who really picked up this mood. I do my duty, you know, because it's meant to be done. Very dispassionate, very, very dutiful. You don't see that as much today. It's more like, I'm doing this because I want something in return. But no, you're just doing it because it's the right thing to do. And you just, you know, maybe some of your parents or grandparents that you knew were like that, you know. So that's what that's what Christians do. I'll fight for this without considering your happiness or your distress, your loss or your gain, your victory or defeat. And then you won't incur sin, because remember that definition of sin is not doing duty. Right? So usually, you know, we think, I'll go to this place, I'll do that because my mind is telling me it's going to be pleasurable. And I'll avoid this and avoid that because it's going to be displeasurable, unpleasurable. Is that a word? But, and that's the way our mind thinks, you know, right? It's like right, in a fancy computer, it's all a zillion zeros and ones, right? Binary. So our mind thinks in a binary way generally. Avoid unpleasant things, be attracted to pleasant things. And what Krishna's saying is here, basically, rewire your brain. And instead, think, good, doing my duty. Bad, not doing my duty. Whether the duty is fun or not, that's not important. Right? Whether I'm going to get, you know, great wealth out of this or not, that's not important. I do it because it's meant to be done. That's kind of the basic level kind of mode of goodness. But in present society, it's so much based on, you know, the different kind of binary thinking. Now, of course, for us as devotees, we also have slightly higher binary thinking, anukuliyasi sankalpa pratikuliyasi varjanam, to accept things that are favorable to bhakti and to reject things that are unfavorable. Bhakti means devotion. So that's another kind of binary thinking, right? It takes this to a higher level. Instead of doing my duty, do my duty for Krishna's pleasure, for God's pleasure. And that ultimately should be the kind of proper use of the mind, because the mind is like that. The mind is binary, right? So it's accepting and rejecting. So the only question is, what is it, on what basis, on what value system, based on what principles is it accepting something and rejecting something else? So for so many lifetimes, our mind has been accepting and rejecting according to what we think will be fun, you know, pleasurable, sense gratification. So now you could say the process that we're going through to purify ourselves is to drag the mind over to say, no, is this going to give Krishna pleasure? Then I'll do it. No matter how hard it is. And is this not going to give Krishna pleasure? I won't do it, no matter how pleasurable it looks. It's a different value system, is the way we would say in the West. Or chitta vritti in Sanskrit, a worldview, different worldview, different way of looking at the world. Any thoughts on that? No? Do you accept that? We better move on because we're supposed to end by 9, right? 8:55.
Kids will come up with the machine they want.
Oh, okay. All right. So the next section is called Buddhi Yoga, or if you want fancy terminology, Nishkam Karma Yoga. And what it is it's combining. We heard about Gyan, right? And we've heard about karma, which was the last section, right? Now, what about if we combine them? Because in verse, Gyan sometimes means inactivity. You know, you sit there in meditation, try to understand you're not this body, go to the forest, right? Karma, usually, you know, running the rat race, you know, facing traffic every day, going to work. But what if you could combine the two? Action in knowledge. That's called Buddhi Yoga. Or even, probably even called Krishna consciousness. You're active, but not foolishly active. You're active in knowledge. And that's basically what's being discussed here. Buddhi Yoga. And first, Krishna kind of glorifies it, right? He says that in this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution. So and just by practicing a little Buddhi Yoga, acting in Krishna consciousness, you're protected from the most dangerous type of fear. Verse 40. Does anyone know what the most dangerous type of fear is?
Death?
No. Not in this context, of course, yes, but that's not what is mentioned here.
Falling down?
These are really good guesses, but they're not the one we're looking for, but yeah, they're good. Not getting prasadam? No, it's getting an animal's body in the next life. Not having at least a human body. Yeah. And then a very important verse for devotees, verse 41. Vyavasaya Likabutir Eke Hakunana. That our Krishna is telling Arjuna, be fixed. Don't be a whip, you know, or use your Kshatriya fixedness to be fixed on the path of Buddhi Yoga. And one of the great acharyas, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, commented on this verse. And in his comment he says, for devotees, this means that one takes the teachings of their guru as their life and soul. And Prabhupada said when he read that, that's what gave him the inspiration to come to America. So he read and Prabhupada mentions it here in the purport, how one takes the spiritual master's order as one's life and soul. So it's a very important verse for us as Prabhupada's followers. So let's see. The famous verse, also 47. Most people, if you ask anyone in India if they know one verse, they usually know the first two lines, no, the first line of 47. Only the first line. Right? Karmani Varikaraste. That you have a right to perform your duty. You say something, no, you should, in the old days, right, we say, why don't you become a brahmachari and join the Talmud? No, Karmani Varikaraste. You know. And then but they don't read the next line, which says, Mafaleshu Kadachana, that you're not supposed to be attached to the fruits of your work. That's not in the vocabulary. So they just know the first line. Like that. What else here? A man engaged, let's see. Well, this is verse 49. Durena Yabram Karma Buddhi Yogam Dhananjaya. Keep all abominable activities far distant by devotional service, and in that, or Buddhi Yoga, and in that consciousness surrender unto the Lord. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers. And then the next verse says, a man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad actions, even in this life. Therefore, strive for yoga, which is the art of all work. That's a nice thing. The art of work, just like there's a art of living, right? Organization, a big organization now in India. Ravi Shankar, right? Yeah. So the art of work is to work, because usually when you are active, you get karma, right? You're doing karma and you get some reaction for it, positive or negative, but you get some karma, right? The art of work is to be active, but not get any karma. And that's by doing everything for Krishna's pleasure, right? As it says here. So therefore, it says here, a man engaged in devotional service rids themselves of good and bad actions. So that it's transcendental to good and bad karma by doing devotional service. And therefore, this is the art of work. To be active in this world, but not caught up in the karmic thing. And that's only possible by doing it for Krishna's pleasure, ultimately. So that's that's the theme of these two verses explain the theme of this section. That you're active, but you're doing it with a different consciousness. And that's the way so sometimes it's explained if you get a thorn, right, just like I got a few thorns in my foot, walking around Govardhan Hill. Like the first day I got to Govardhan Hill, the devotee said, you should just go on Prikrama. Govardhan Hill, so the mountain there, to walk around is 22 kilometers. Right, but it's about 11 miles? 10 miles? So he said, no, you just arrived in a holy place, so just go on. So there I was, I just, jet lag and everything, walking around Govardhan Hill, barefoot. But anyway, you get a thorn in your side, and one of the best ways, if it's going deep, is to take another thorn and take it out. So we got the thorn by doing activities. And to take it out, you take it out with another activity, and that is the activity for Krishna's pleasure. Right? And in this section also, Krishna says, you can't be inactive even for a minute. Because even when we're sleeping, it seems like we're inactive. Our mind's going like crazy, right? We're having so many dreams and things like that. Right? So the soul is active by nature. So therefore, indirectly also Krishna is saying, don't think you're just going to go to the Himalayas and meditate. Because you're active by nature. So after a while you're going to think, man, this is boring. Right? And you're probably going to want to come back, probably say, and do some mundane activity, even if it's philanthropic. Right? But rather, be active for Krishna's pleasure. That's basically what's being said here in this section. I'm just looking at my notes here. Any thoughts or questions on that? Okay, then let's go on to the last section, 54 to 72. It's talking ultimately about samadhi. Samadhi means totally fixed in consciousness. So the first part talks about how the senses are really distracting. Each sense is looking for its sense object. Right? The nose is looking for something to smell that's very nice. The eyes are wanting to look for something nice to see. Right? The mouth wants to taste something very nice. The skin wants to touch something very nice, etc. So Krishna, the first part talks about how it's not easy to control the senses. Okay? I like the example in 58 about the tortoise. That the tortoise can bring their limbs within their, and if you've ever been to Radhakund, you see the tortoises going around Radhakund, which is a sacred lake in India. And if you agitate the water a little bit near them, you just go, and you really get to see the limbs go inside their body. But then in the very next verse, 59, which is a super important verse, Vishaya vinivartante niraha rasudehina, that just telling somebody, you got to control your senses, just, no sense gratification, don't try to enjoy this world, that's not going to last very long. But Krishna says, it's easy to do that if you have something more pleasurable. right? Like I saw this with my wife. So when we moved from India, we didn't have much money, and but I knew we needed a car, so I got a used Prius, 2005 Prius with like 100,000 miles, and she just loved it. She's like, she has her own car, and it's a Prius. It gets really good gas mileage, and all that. And we probably put another 100,000 miles on in just the last few years. I don't know if this is a great example, but anyway. But then I got a job and got a little more money, and so I got her a new Prius, right? And so all of a sudden that other one was like, okay, give that one to my son. And she was like, didn't want to see it again, right? Because she had a brand new one with the seats that warm up, and it's 9 years newer than or whatever than the one we had. So it's kind of like that. So if you think that the senses is in the all in all, you really want to try to enjoy them. But if you get a higher taste, if you get something better, then it's easy to just let go of sense gratification. If you're enjoying on a different level, right? Then when you really are enjoying in Krishna consciousness, and sense gratification, or just the ways that most people live their lives, it just doesn't make sense. Like, you look at it like, why would I ever want to do that? Why would I ever want to eat meat? Why would I ever want to, take intoxicants? Why would I want to, it doesn't make any sense to a person. It reminds me of when I used to travel in India a lot by train, second class, not AC. Everybody, you know what it's like, right? Everyone brings out their tiffins at night, and they're all, talking. And I didn't understand a word of Hindi at that time. I know a few words now, but I didn't. So for me, it was all like white noise, background, but I didn't understand a word of it. It just didn't make any sense to me. So that's kind of like what a person who has a higher taste, sense gratification, doesn't make any sense to them. If I traveled with my son, he could understand every word that they were saying. That's because he knows Hindi. But it was great in that sense, because whatever people were talking about, I could be reading the Bhagavad Gita or chanting Hare Krishna or whatever, and didn't understand a word they're saying. So, as we make spiritual advancement, things, other types of life, just why would I want to do that? So there's more talk about this, the whole thing about the senses. Krishna says they're so strong that they could forcibly carry away the mind of even a person who's of discrimination, who's trying to control them. That's discrimination is verses 11 to 30, right? So you made that discrimination. But that's not enough. Just that knowledge is not enough. You have to be enjoying Krishna consciousness, right? Otherwise, even one of the senses that the mind focuses on, I think that's the next verse, or a little further. And then 62 and 63 are famous. When contemplating the object, it gives the whole process. You contemplate the objects of the senses, right? You drive by that new car in the park in the Lexus shop every day on their way to work, right? Then you develop an attachment, and from an attachment, lust develops. You really want that thing, right? And when you don't get it right away, from lust comes anger, right? If you really think about anger, usually anger comes from unfulfilled desires. When anger arises, that develops delusion. From delusion, bewilderment of memory, you forget who you are. When memory is bewildered, your intelligence is lost. When intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So that's the progression. It all begins with contemplating the objects of the senses. And then Krishna gives a contrast to the next verse, but a person free from all attachment and aversion, like and dislike in this world. See, it's interesting, right? What happened, our senses are kind of like, especially our eyes, right? They're just like, they're neutral. They're just like a video camera, right? But then we add interpretation to what we see, right? If I see, if Indulekha Mataji, gave me, of course it's prasadam, so, but if she gave me a plate of Loki sabji, right? So really my eyes are just seeing Loki, right? But then the modes of material nature are forcing me to interpret it in a certain way, right? Ooh, right, or whatever. Or if she said, paneer sabji made with ahimsa milk and cat, whatever, right. But all it really is cashews and cheese and right. But we add it's usually, we'll study more about the modes of material nature later. But they kind of influence us to put a label on that. Paneer sabji good, Loki bad. Right? Ohio State bad, Michigan good. And we get caught up in the dualities of the world. Right? So it's a training to it's actually a practice of self-realization, to observe the mind, and instead of being, usually we're pretty much one with the mind. Right? Whatever our mind dictates, we say, yes sir, yes ma'am. Aye aye. Right? But then to take a step back and and to say, wait a second, why do you not like, the mind saying don't like Loki, but wait a second, this is prashad, you can separate your intelligence from your mind and watch the mind work. It's quite an amazing thing to detach ourselves from the mind, because really the mind is barking at us all day long. Right? And it's basing all this like and dislike on interpreting something. So if we detach ourselves, we can reinterpret that. Right?
Is it impossible to detach yourself?
Yeah. By practice and detachment. Actually, that's just try it sometime. Try to watch your mind, and say, well, wait a second, I'm not my mind, so maybe I don't have to follow this. Right? And maybe there's somebody that that when you see them, you get a little bit of that, or maybe a little envy, or something like that. So maybe try catching yourself and say, wait a second, that's a person, spirit, soul. Not their body. I'm sure they actually have a lot of good qualities. And why can't I reframe the way my mind is forcing me to observe something?
Yeah, there is a nice video also, like from it's called Mind Your Mind. It's a
Mind Your
sketch,
Mind.
small sketch. So it's nice.
Okay.
But the same thing you already mentioned. We do same with the people also, like we label people.
Yes, and we
In
make
the office,
assumptions.
and we make assumptions. He's good, he's
Yeah.
bad.
We
But
assume.
in a way, he's not good either or bad.
Right? And when you assume, you know how assume is spelled, right? A-S-S-U-M-E? Right?
I
So,
know.
yeah. Okay, how much time do we have left? Ooh, 1 minute? Is that right? Did you say 8:55? Oh, we have 11 minutes. We have plenty of time. We can cover the rest of the Bhagavad Gita. For one who is thus satisfied in Krishna consciousness, this is 65, the threefold miseries of material existence exist no longer. In such satisfied consciousness, one's intelligence is well established. Isn't that what we want to do? We want to, of course we want Krishna's satisfaction, right? But it would be nice to be satisfied, right? Because satisfaction, I was a brahmachari for many years. I lived a very simple life. And all of my belongings could fit in a box about this big. I was like a monk, and if I was going to India, okay, it was easy to pack my bag. It took about this much space. 2 dhotis, 2 kurtas, they're Indian clothing. Kurta's like a long shirt, and kurta's like a pair of pants. And toothbrush, off I go. Satisfied, But whatever it is, we may be satisfied living in a mansion, we may be satisfied living as a brahmachari, but to have the mind, because the mind is so much like, I want, I need, why does that person have more than I have, why, or why does that person, we didn't even do it in Krishna, why does he know more shlokas than I know, or whatever, right? To have that kind of lessening of the mode of passion is really wonderful. There's that warning in 67 that as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. And this is really nice, 69. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled. And the time of awakening for all beings is night for the introspective sage. And I really saw this verse live and in color. I spent some time in Hong Kong. Because Hong Kong, when I lived in India, it wasn't far to go to Hong Kong. And so the temple's very small. There's only one place that accommodates like sannyasis or something. So usually we stay at a guest house nearby and walk to the temple. This is if anyone knows Hong Kong, it's in Kowloon rather than across the river in Hong Kong itself. So, to walk from the guest house to the temple for Mangal Arati, which starts at 4:30 in the morning, I walk by a number of bars. So I'm walking there around 10 after 4, and I just took a shower and clean clothes, and I have my hand in my bead bag, and I'm chanting Krishna's name, and people are literally stumbling out of the bars. They've been there sometimes 3 or 4 hours, and sometimes, anyway, it's not always a neat scene, even sometimes people are losing what they had eaten earlier and this and that. And this verse came to mind, obviously, right? That, what is night for all beings is a time of awakening for the self-control, and the time of awakening for all beings, so our paths caught, the beginning of my day was the end of their day, and it was going in a slightly different direction. Like that, so I really saw that in Hong Kong. You should go visit the temple in Hong Kong, stay at that guest house, and you'll realize this first. And here's another. Krishna uses a lot of metaphors, a lot of examples. Because sometimes philosophy is hard to grasp if it's just philosophy. But when you explain it with, like the tortoise bringing their limbs, or here in verse 70, as a person who is not disturbed by the incessant flows of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. Right? That's the one time Prabhupada was walking along the Pacific in LA, the Pacific Ocean, and the word Pacific comes from the word pacify, right? And he said, "Why is it Pacific? Why is it so peaceful?" And the devotees are coming up with all kinds of things, and he says, "Because it's very deep." So the deeper we are in Krishna consciousness, the deeper we feel shelter of God. To that extent, the winds of this world that sway us this way and that way don't affect us. Because, we have a deep shelter somewhere else. So that's what's being hinted at in this. Because this, I didn't mention this in the beginning, but this is, as Prabhupada calls it, the contents of the Gita summarized. It's like a table of contents for the whole rest of the book. And finally he says, this is the way of the spiritual and godly life, after attaining which a man is not bewildered. If one is thus situated, even at the hour of death, one can enter into the kingdom of God. So that's chapter 2. Briefly, some thoughts? Yes.
One question. What is that one verse in this chapter that stands out that I can remember? Of course, everything should be remembered, but
you wanted to remember one verse. Not currently. I would say either 13 or 59. Yeah, 59 was one about the higher taste. Because that is something you could meditate on. That if I have a higher taste in Krishna consciousness, then renouncing, enjoying this world becomes easy. You know? It's just like, you know, if, you know, the same example, it wasn't maybe the best thing, but if you have, you know, you have a car that you really need to get to work and you have it, it's a, you know, it's a 2000 Corolla, and it's fine, right? But then somebody hands you the keys to a brand new whatever, right? You know, hybrid Mercedes, so you get really good gas mileage and it's a luxury, right? And then you know that 2000 Corolla, you can lose interest in that real quick, right? So similarly, you know, we may, if all we know is sense gratification and enjoying this world the way most people do, you know, we treasure that because it's all we know. But if we got something much better, you know, so that might be, it's a good verse to meditate on. Because if we are feeling some attraction to this world, then we can look at that verse and say, wow, I better, you know, go deeper in my spirituality, deeper in my chanting or my reading of books, because I'm feeling some of this attraction, and I know that that's the, you know, Krishna says in the Gita, the real way to overcome that is by getting a higher taste. Is that right? So 59.
Thank you.
You know, in the last slok, like it's asking me like one can enter into the kingdom of God.
Yes.
And if you look at the verse, like it says Brahma Nirvanam.
Right.
Which is says like a Brahma, is it talking about Brahmacharya or Golaka? Because Brahma Nirvanam, Prabhupada is translating as kingdom of God.
Yes. The spiritual kingdom of God. Right.
What do you mean by actually entering into the kingdom of God?
What is meant by, well, first of all, are you questioning why he translated it in that way?
Yeah, that is, but it's okay because if you look at the Bhagavad Gita, they will translate into this personal aspect.
Right, exactly.
But
So,
Prabhupada's mood is different. Yeah.
well, yeah, because that's why he called it Bhagavad Gita, literally yata, as it is means yata, right? Yeah, as it is. Because he knows the conclusion, and the conclusion comes in the middle 6 chapters, of course, right, where they focus on bhakti and going to. So what does it mean to enter into the kingdom of God? It means to be absorbed in service to God, devotional service. Because in another place, Prabhupada says that the spiritual world and devotional service are the same. Yeah. But literally there is the spiritual world, according to the Bhagavad Gita. That's mentioned especially in the 8th chapter. Sometimes said that the material worlds are like 1/4 of the creation of God, and the spiritual worlds are 3/4. So it's good to develop a desire to go to the spiritual world. And in order to do that, you need to read the descriptions about it. You only get a preliminary description in Bhagavad Gita, you get much more in the Bhagavatam, Brihat Bhagavatam, in these other books, Chaitanya Charitamrita. But we should develop a desire to go there, because, and we have to be careful not to like try to imagine it with our mind, right? Because otherwise it can seem a little boring. You know, what am I going to do? Make garlands all day? You know, we think like that. Oh, you know, it sounds like boring. You know, here at least there's football games. You know, what do they do there for fun? You know, it's not like that. It's totally enjoyable because it's just based on devotion and love. But we should become attracted to the spiritual world. What else? How much time do we have? We have no time. Time is over. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. What's next?
This is
In between what she
This chapter is order to years. You can see 2 years. You can handle that.
can